Welcome back. You're here with Dr. Goldberg, your very own Capo del Governo. Today I am proud to announce the publication of my latest book, The Truth About Mussolini and Fascism. This text is actually 10 years or so in the making, believe it or not, because in 2011 I started a blog dedicated to Italian politics. And I was very interested in delving into Mussolini and fascism because I had a couple of relatives who, they were deceased by now, rest in peace, not people with a lot of means, not rich or prominent, but they loved Il Duce. And that didn't make any sense to me because if you look at the typical American textbook on World War II, it'll contain something like,
No, he's 1%. He was a meanie. You can't say that.
which of course is not accurate, flat out. So I began with my local library and the internet.com, which had a little bit of information, but not as much as I needed. When I got to university, I had a very passionate, exotic, interracial love affair with the library, and that's when I started stumbling across Luigi Villari, Herbert Schneider, Renzo de Felice, which those were all clarifications. I said, okay, I understand. I get why Mussolini had cross-class appeal. I understand why poor people were backing him. I understand the reasons for the international community being so obsessed with ensuring he fell from power. Not because he was a dictator, not because they wanted democracy, but rather due to what he was doing, how effective he had become, and his insistence that international relations be governed by mutual respect, not essentially, well, we've had an empire, therefore we make all the rules and you can go screw yourself. In this last year, 2020, we've had so much of this tumultuous development, moronic U.S. politicians who misuse terminology. I said, okay, it's long last time for an American, an English-based source to explain to people what fascism is, what it accomplished, and just, put in the trash bin all these idiotic claims. This is corporatism, this is fascism from progressives, conservatives, libertarians, and the like. This book, I began the research and writing around March or April. It's taken, up until this point, done quite a few edits, so I think it's more or less at 100%, but there might be a few errata, hopefully not. I have a mixture of Western and European sources. I was not able to get one, which I think is called 700 Giorni di Salo, because it was hard to actually purchase, and it's only in Italian. So that is one shortcoming, but well over 500 citations. This is going to change your perspective, whether you're a World War II buff or you just have a general knowledge of the period. So when it comes to fascism, a lot of people have a caricature image, unsurprisingly. It's just some mean dictator who's supporting rich people and crushing the rights of the poor. In fact, usually they showcase the socialists and the leftists like these innocent victims who did nothing wrong and were just being bullied. So it would be something like, hey, look at all these people, they're just trying to protest their rights, and of course the fascistic cops come and get them. Not really. So the leftists were committing acts after World War I against opponents, against priests, nuns, civilians, children, that most of us can't even think of how disgusting they are, and many are brought up in my book. The fascists were defending people. They were defending crops, they were defending small farmers, defending religious people, defending public order. They, in many respects, believed there was going to be a new communist revolution in Italy because there had been the successful one in 1917 in Russia. So you don't hear about that stuff. It's all, oh, they were just defending the industrialists. There were industrialists who opposed the fascists because the strikes and the leftists worked to their advantage depending on the context. So we go through that. We go through what the fascists accomplished, how they treated rich and poor, because you're not going to hear about how they actually imprisoned and in some cases beat up rich people who were trying to screw over their employees. A lot of great information on the economic system, on corporatism, syndicalism. Definitely worth checking out from that standpoint. Another front has to do with Ethiopia. So when the fascists invaded, it's like, oh, it was an act of aggression, wanton and reckless warmongering. What's interesting about Ethiopia is that prior to the Italians coming in, they were ruled by like a traditional royalty system, very close connection to the British, by the way, which is why the British were angry about what Mussolini did. And the chief was, of course, Haile Selassie, who today I believe Rastafarians consider to be some kind of god or prophet or savior, messiah, whatever. He told the League of Nations he was going to eradicate slavery in 1923, and he failed to do so, probably because it was very lucrative for his economy. When the Italians invaded in 1936, and yes, they did set up a colony. A lot of Ethiopians get triggered when you mention that, but it was a colony. The first things the fascists did, amongst other reforms, is they eliminated slavery, because Ethiopians were going over into Italian Somaliland, taking Somalians and making them slaves. So black people enslaving black people. No one hears about that, right? The fascists ended that. And it took, even once the fascists were driven out, it took until 1942 for Ethiopian proper to abolish slavery. And then, of course, I think he was overthrown some decades later by communists to establish the Derg or the Dirge. So it's some interesting history you're not going to hear about because it has to be, poor people being oppressed by Italians. We also go and dispel the myths of war crimes thrown against Italians, and we bring up the fact that it was actually the Ethiopians who were using the illegal weaponry, and the Italians responded with their own arsenal, but only because they were first being attacked with certain articles of war. So it's good to know because, again, in your typical Western context, you're not going to hear about this stuff. Another angle of that is the Italian Social Republic. It is described by Western historians in this kind of foppish, arrogant manner. It didn't achieve anything. It was just propaganda. It was ruled by the Germans. There's a lot more to it than that. In fact, they were immensely successful with the campaign towards socialization, towards getting workers involved in management, just like they did under corporatism. In fact, they were, in many respects, independent of the Germans. So there's much clarification. My book is one of the only in the English language, because I've read pretty much all of them available, that deals with the Social Republic in more detail than simply saying it was a puppet state, end of story. So certainly from that standpoint, geopolitical, you'll find that quite endearing. Then if we look at a lot of the Allied leaders who are typically portrayed as these, great icons of defending freedom and democracy. So like these two guys were trying to defend freedom and democracy, and that's why they allied with him. So, some examples would be, "The day will live in infamy," or "Russia strong," or our friend over here, who I think he said something like, "We will fight in landing grounds." No disrespect to Churchill, who's probably the best of the three, but he didn't understand geopolitics. He was completely obsessed with being anti-German, and his decisions, ultimately he learned, but he learned too late. He wanted to do Operation Unthinkable because he realized, oh yeah, Franco and Mussolini were correct, that this guy is now controlling half of Europe, if we had only listened to them. So you realize wars ultimately tend to be driven by finance, by economic objectives. These two guys, their main fault, and they were not perfect people, this is not to say that they did everything right. Their main problem is that they were challenging an established financial order, and that's what brought so much hell and hailfire down upon them. They were saying, hey, let's have a more equitable international system. Let's not have a financial structure that is basically just benefiting the Western democracies. And a lot of that contributed to the war. They're not flawless, they're not blameless, but we have to acknowledge those realities. And that's what the book attempts to do. Now, some of you have said, hey, are you going to write about Germany? Potentially. I might do a book on socialism of the right in the future. Those are projects which will take more research. But I do want to say, going back to the book that I came out with, I'm going to ask you for a little bit of assistance here. Obviously, with YouTube, the algorithm has become very discriminatory. I have a lot of followers, but I can't even reach them. Many of them say they can't see my content. So there's two things you can do that can really help out with this. I don't have really a profit motive. I spent about $250 some, if not more, on buying research material, design, editing, all that. My objective is not to recruit that, but rather get the message out there so hopefully we can prevent another war in the future. Because you see how the Democrats want war with Russia or war with Syria, whatever, which will just be destructive and frankly counterproductive ultimately. You don't even have to spend money ultimately for this. So you just pick up the ebook version, hold on to it for maybe, 48 hours, read it or skim it, regardless of what your interests are, and then just go on and drop a solid review, and then you can return it. Within the 7-day period, you get a full refund. If we can build up to about 20 or so decent reviews, what that will allow it to do is that the typical normie who's, I'm interested in World War II, they might find this on Amazon, and so it'll spread the word, because this book could very well get banned just for the fact that it offers a different perspective. That's what I would ask that you do. Again, you don't even have to spend money. You can just get a refund. I'm not going to be hurt by that because it's about the message. It's not about profit. And alternatively, or you can do both, if you follow any, edgy meme pages or whatnot, if you follow a cartoon character who's married to a frog, spread the word about this book. A lot of people would benefit from it. Not simply folks who are already skeptical of the message, but like I said, the normies in particular. So if you could help me out with that, I really appreciate it, because it is difficult as an individual person, if you're not dedicating all your time to Twitter or to social media, to really project stuff. But that would be a great benefit, not so much to myself, but to the expansion of knowledge and truth. And that is fundamentally what I'm trying to do, because I don't want to see more Europeans or Americans or any other people die in stupid wars that are based upon petty assumption and financial greed. So yeah, that's my point of view. Please check out the book, and if there are other topics you're interested in seeing in books in the future, just drop it in the comments section and we'll take a look.